Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to Sasquatch Speaks. I am Sasquatch, otherwise known as Gavisas. Thank you all for coming by today. I hope you enjoy what you're about to hear. Yesterday, I talked about my first time going down to actually help with the person's campaign and all that sort of stuff like that. And I made reference to a topic which I was going to push off until later, but I figured why not just get it out of the way so people don't lose their frame of reference. People who watch those videos, these videos, the Sasquatch Speak videos, as they come out, so you don't lose your frame of reference. I mentioned yesterday that I was going to be a little bit hypocritical about not caring how people voted, and that's kind of what I'm going to talk about today. Because really, and I'm going to preface this, I really don't care how people vote. I would like the people that I vote for and the proposals and stuff that I vote for or against to either be, well, respectively, to either pass or to fail. But I can't control that. And in the last election, I will admit, I got beat pretty badly. The last election and the primary just this last Tuesday. Or just this Tuesday that was just there. That's the one. I think maybe one or two of my candidates won. The guy I was helping out, he didn't win. Which, again, not exactly the worst thing, because the guy who was running against was much better. After meeting him and talking with him and all that, and finding out what his actual platform and stuff was, so and who he was as a person, and not having all sorts of dastardly things. Well, not really dastardly things, but just things that weren't particularly the best in his background. But the proposals and things that were on the ballot, I didn't want either of those to pass, and they did. And yeah, so I got beat up pretty bad, but it's okay. People can decide to vote however they wish. I just wish that most of them would do a little bit more research before they showed up to the polls to find out what this stuff actually means. That's not really the point, though. The point is that I have this thought, kind of this idea that is gonna sound really bad when I say it. At least to Americans, it's gonna sound really bad. People overseas, probably don't care at all. But people here in America, not just America, but specifically the United States. I don't really think we need to be a United States anymore. Just gonna. There you go. I said it. It's out there. It's in the open. I understand the concepts and everything that the country was built on, and that we're supposed to be united under a union and a flag and a creed and all this sort of wonderful ideals. And at the start, it was working really well. But somewhere along the line, and I would tend to think it was somewhere shortly after the Civil War, because that's when people started saying, referring to the United States as the United States is rather than the United States are. But really, we are an are, not an is. We are a country, but we are a country that is made up of separate sovereign nations. And if you look at it, each of our different states are sovereign. They have the right to rule and govern their people as they see fit. Each of the separate states has a constitution. Each of the separate states has a protected right under the federal government to be able to do whatever they want with their citizens. It's not Article number 10, but it's the 10th Amendment. Anything that's specifically laid out within the Constitution falls to the states and their prerogative and the people there to choose how they wish to be governed. It's not a top-down dictatorship at the federal level. It's a bottom-up democracy, starting at the people, going to the states, and then on into the federal. But somewhere along the line, we've lost this concept, and we've fallen into this mindset as a nation that everything that happens must come from the top down. And to say it's been detrimental, I think, is an understatement. Everything nowadays, when something goes wrong, well, let the government handle it. Or I lost my house, I lost my job. What is the government doing to fix this problem? Rather than, as it was meant to be, from the people, being, okay, well, something bad has happened, how can I go and fix that? With perhaps getting aid from the government. It's now, well, the government just needs to do it, and I don't have to worry about it. And I understand there are people who have a different mindset about it, and I am one of them. But just within my own sphere of influence, people that I talk to on a regular basis, it seems to be the prevailing mindset that most people have the government help me mindset, rather than I am the enabler of the government to do things. And that really is how it is. I mean, people who pay taxes, they are the ones who basically limit the government on what they should and should not be able to do. I say should and should not do and do not, because, as I said, the federal government has exceeded its authority in many different cases and places, and none more poignant than the $17 trillion deficit, or not deficit, but debt. Deficit is how much they add to the debt every year. People who say that they're reducing the debt, they're not actually reducing the debt, they're just reducing how much they're adding to the debt. And when they say they're going to lower taxes, they don't actually mean they're going to lower taxes, they mean they're going to lower the already accounted for increase that's going to happen anyway. So yeah, or cut spending, it's the same thing. They've already planned in an increase, they're just going to cut how much that increase is. They're not actually going to say, okay, well, we're going to spend less this year than we did last year. Not how it works. It should work that way. Language should be universal, but politics thinks they're the exception. And that is another part of the problem, because the federal government thinks itself an exception. It thinks itself above the rule of its own law. And I'm not saying that, again, I'm not saying that everyone who's involved with the federal government thinks this way. I'm not saying that everyone who pays into the federal government is a bad person. I pay my taxes. I kind of have to. It's the way things are. But I'm saying that perhaps the time for things to be that way is drawing to a close. Getting back to the states as sovereign nations. We all pay taxes both on the federal and the state level, but really what we pay for to the federal level are, well, it should only be going for defense. I mean, that's how it's laid out in the Constitution. It's supposed to be okay for the defense, and I think for infrastructure. So it's supposed to be like for railroads, or as the interpretation was to change, it's supposed to be for, highways and things, or as technology increased into whatever sort of things will replace highways, and they probably will be replaced at some point. But it's supposed to be for infrastructure and the common defense. That was it. Nothing in the Constitution makes any reference to welfare, entitlement. In fact, back in the days, the reason that was not put in is because it was a shameful thing for people to be put upon any sort of assistance or charity or welfare, whatever you want to call it. It was a shameful thing, and people avoided it at all costs. They would literally go out and sit in a gutter with a tin cup, say, give me money, rather than let me be put on charity or some sort of a program like that. And I'm going to try and not talk about all the entitlements and stuff in this video. I'll probably do that again later on. But it's just something that bothers me, that it's now not become just acceptable, but actively encouraged that people seek out entitlements and things like that. And I'm just going to leave that as it is. But again, this is another example of the federal government overstepping its intended purpose. Anyway, each of the separate states have their own programs like that. So if the federal government was to go away, most of those things would still continue on. Probably not in the same aspect, and certainly not to the same extent, but they would still continue on. People would still be able to get whatever money it is that they require. Or more likely what would happen is that, okay, let's try and break this up. Because if the federal government were to be dissolved, and I'm not advocating any sort of open revolt or riot or anything else like that, I'm just throwing out an idea really here. Yeah, and I'm not going to suggest methodology or anything to that extent. But I'm just looking at the way things fall. If this is a hypothetical, that's a good way of putting it. This is a hypothetical idea of what if the federal government was to be dissolved. First and foremost, people, I know I said that each of the separate states is sovereign, but I highly doubt that each of those separate states would remain separate from all the other ones. It would probably get broken up into like maybe like 10 or 20 separate little countries. I could see Texas kind of being their own thing because they were before, and maybe they get like New Mexico or Arizona to join with them or something like that, just because, similar ideals and similar problems, really. That'd be a good way to put it. Most of the country would be broken up by the different problems that those parts of the country face. California, Oregon, Washington would probably be something together there. All them weird people out on that West Coast. And I'm not advocating breaking it up. I'm just looking at it by the way that people think. And the thing is that each of those separate nations that would emerge from the United States would have within itself its own separate political climate, like they do even now. It's just that it's contained under the umbrella of the United States of America. And then people within those separate nations would have the options or the opportunity to remove themselves from undesirable legislation. So, say you're in Texas, bunch of good old boys down there. They like to have their freedom from the morning and get it back up in the night and just have it go all day. Freedom of guns, religion, the whole 9 yards, basically anything goes, really. Very libertarian mindset, which I tend to like. As opposed to where I'm from, in the eastern side, where tends to be a lot more socialistic in thought, mindset, and theory, in approaches to government and governing people and interactions amongst ourselves and the common state and the goodness of all that sort of thing. And like I said, I like where I live. I really like the weather here, especially in the winter. But if it came down to it, and people were like, hey, the politics of your place are going to change drastically, and we're going and there's going to be another place that will make it easier for you to line up with thoughts and ideals and principles, and perhaps even succeed more, or have more opportunity to succeed in your personal life than where you are, I probably would move somewhere else where it would be more conducive to my thought patterns. And then we could actually the experiment that is America, not was America, but is America, is whether or not the Union could withstand. And it can and it can't. Because at some point, it all comes back to money. And that's really kind of how this all came to mind. I was talking with a friend of mine who is from the Deep South. Grew up in Georgia. And he was explaining to me the difference between how things are taught in the South versus how things are taught in the North. And it really sort of brought into alignment, in my mind, how disunified the United States are. Probably the best example is how the history of the Civil War is taught. Here in the North, all we ever talk about is, they were keeping slaves, it's against humanity, yada yada, so on and so forth. We went down there and we freed the slaves, yada, and we were, the great victors and triumphant liberators. In the South, how they teach it is known as the War of Northern Aggression. They do not even refer to it as the Civil War. It is the War of Northern Aggression. And the causality that they espouse over down there is that the majority of the tax income for the United States government in those days, in the 1850s, 1860s, was from the southern states, because they were the gigantic agricultural hub. This was before the industrial revolution and factories and everything else like that popping up in the North. So most of the tax revenue was coming from the South. And as a result, they kept raising taxes and raising taxes and raising taxes and raising taxes up until the point where people in the South were getting charged upwards of 80% of their entire income and getting paid to the federal government. And it's like, if someone was to try and charge me 80% of everything I was making, I would probably have a problem with that too. I understand their methodology for earning that income, slavery, it's wrong. Not going to dispute that, not going to say anything negative about the freeing of the slaves. However, when the people in the South were like, hey, stop taxing us so much, and the federal government was like, no, we're going to tax you more, they're like, well, then we're going to withdraw. And they tried to secede. And secession is something which is covered under the Constitution. It's not laid out explicitly, but it is implied that if at any point in the future it doesn't work out, people who don't, the separate member states can decide, you know what, it's not working out. We want to remove ourselves from this equation. And rather than allow that to happen, it really was the war of northern aggression. Not me, but my ancestors, well, not even my ancestors, because they're a bunch of lazy, well, not lazy, they're just a bunch of very rich men who didn't decide to go and do that. They just kind of paid their way out of it. That's another story. But they didn't go. The North went down there and was like, hey, keep giving us our money because that's what's keeping this whole thing afloat. Which is understandable, because if you've got something coming in and you know it's going to be there, and all of a sudden it's like, well, hey, we're not going to give it to you anymore, people get a little upset. That's like what happened in Greece just a couple years ago. The government had leveraged itself into bankruptcy, trying to keep its welfare programs for its citizens afloat, and then when it could no longer fulfill those promises that it had made to them, because again it leveraged itself into complete obscurity, the people revolted, and there was a mass rioting in all the streets because people were like, hey, the thing you were giving me, you're not giving it to me anymore. It's a very childish response, but it's a very human one. I'm not going to get it. Trying not to get too deep into like psychological reasoning and stuff like that, which I have a lot of theories on, but I'm not trained in, so it's all just a bunch of bullcrap that comes out of my mouth referring to that. But that same mindset of we want to be a part of something different, or we don't want to be a part of your club anymore. It still is very much prevalent today. Not even in the South. Not just in the South, but out west, central states. A lot of them have like, okay, well, we're still a part of the United States, but there's talks all the time, and if you just delve just a little bit deeper into the political spectrum and the sphere of all the other places that are in the United States, you'll find out that there are quite a few states who, on a regular basis, talk about leaving the Union because they don't like where it's going. They don't think it's conducive to their economy or the welfare of their people, which is really, again, what the point of government is, to look after the welfare, not to give welfare, but to look after the best state of being of their people. And if they decide that to give welfare programs and stuff like that is the best way to do it, then that's fine. That's their prerogative. But within the context of our United States and our United States Constitution, that is not the direction in which it was ever intended to go. This is quote, the land of opportunity. It's where we're supposed to be working with our own hands, working to build for ourselves. And it's quite disturbing when you look around and you see that that's not the case anymore. People don't even want to work for themselves anymore. They're just, well, either give me a 9 to 5 and let me collect a paycheck, or just the government give it to me, and I'm entitled to it because I'm here. Again, I have some contacts in the immigrant, some of the immigrant societies here in America, and there are people from overseas who are told about the wonderful welfare programs here in America, and are actually taught classes overseas how to get on American welfare within like 2 weeks of coming here. There's something wrong when that's possible, because people who come to America are supposed to bring something to the table. I don't even have that big of a problem with illegal immigrants as long as they're doing something to, you know, advance the place around them. If they're being constructive and contributing, I don't really have a problem with them. If they're coming here and sponging off the system, there's a big problem. I mean, and it's not that they're coming here, oh, and things went wrong, so they're coming here too. That is their main purpose. And it's like, why is this a thing that's happening here in like my country? And like I said, it's because the government has overstepped its bounds. The federal government has removed from itself that part that goes like, hey, there's a limit to our power. There's a limit to our authority. And we ought to respect that. And we ought to respect the private liberties of the people that are in here. And while it's a little weird to say this, people, as in general, have a right to fail. And I didn't want to get on this on welfare, but I am anyway, so I'm just going to forge ahead. People have the right to fail. It's a part of opportunity. Opportunity is a risk which is realized. That's what it is. You're never going to get ahead if you never take any risks. The downside is that some of the risks that you take are not going to work out, and that is when you will fail. And people will fail. But somehow we've got into our minds and into our thought processes that to fail is the ultimate evil. Like just a couple years ago, with all the big banks and stuff like that. They're too big to fail. Well, were they? What situation would we be in right now if they had been allowed to fail? I mean, honestly, think about this. If we had allowed all those banks to fail, and GM, and like I said, I'm from Michigan, so GM is one of those things you do not touch. They're like what's the concept here? They're like the gleaming tower in the sky, and you never approach it, you never touch it. It's holy, and you don't mess with it. But what if we had allowed them to fail? What if we'd have let Chrysler go? Yeah, there would have been a lot of people out of jobs. And if we'd have let the big banks go, there would have been a lot of people who would have been kicked out of their houses. A lot more people who would have been kicked out of their houses, because there already were something like 3 million families who were dispossessed. Or more. I think it was more. I don't know. It's been a couple years. I don't remember the exact statistic. But what if we had allowed that to happen? Yes, 2 major companies would have, speaking from the auto perspective, 2 major companies in America would have dissolved. And probably like 100,000 people would have lost their jobs. But at the same time, that would have opened up a new opportunity for someone else to come in and fill that space. And I'm not advocating the tearing down of the system and everything else like that. I'm saying let the system work. Big companies fall apart. Okay. That's really bad. People lost their homes and everything else like that due to predatory, quote-unquote predatory lending. Because again, people do have the right to read the contract and understand what's in it, and then make an educated decision on whether to sign it or not. Apparently a lot of them didn't do that, otherwise they wouldn't have been in that situation. But it came to that point where just like, I don't know, people just didn't want to put forth that effort to understand what it was that they were getting into. But had we allowed those things to fail, like I said, a lot more people would have been dispossessed. We'd probably had about a third of the country who would have lost their homes. And that's the way it is. But at the same time, had we allowed all those large financial corporations to fail, then all of the other debts and things that they held would have been dissolved. And we would have had about half the country who would have suddenly been completely debt-free. Because if there's no entity to pay that money back to, it becomes yours, essentially, even if you don't have it to pay back. or even if you spent it as soon as you borrowed it. Think about it that way. We could have had a virtually debt-free society just by allowing those corporations to fall. And if people get dispossessed from their house, but they no longer have to make their debt payments, they can use that to go and start working on buying a new house, or at least renting until they can. They could have opened up an entire new renters market, which would have greatly stimulated the economy. For a couple months, it would have been really bad. But after that, things would have gotten much better. Like I said, I'm not advocating the hostile takeover America or tearing down the system or anything else like that. I'm just throwing out a hypothetical here. What if we had allowed things to happen that way in 2008? What if we decided that, this whole United States club isn't working out, and say the Southwest and the Midwest, and then the Deep South, and way out the West Coast and the East Coast and New England and everything else like that, decide, what, we all kind of want to form our own little separate clubs from the major one here. And since we're all forming our separate ones, that major one isn't really necessary anymore. There's a lot of history involved there. We really like it. We're going to keep maintaining all the national landmarks and everything else like that. But in terms of participation within this, it's not for us anymore. We don't want to still be paying 20 or 30% of all of our income to the feds. We want to keep what we earn, and now there'll still be taxation, like within the separate member states and everything else like that, even as there is now, but it'll be a whole lot less. And people who say, well, what about Social Security and everything else like that? Well, people have to understand. You're paying into it right now, but what you're paying into it will be less than what you get out. And that's just how the system is designed to work. And even what you're paying in doesn't stay there. It's supposed to stay there, but it doesn't. They go, hey, there's a big pile of money here. We can use that for anything else. And they do. If you don't believe me, look it up, because it's on the internet. You can find it. I think that's all I'm going to say today. I've been rambling enough, and probably have alienated half my audience long before now. Just kind of a thought about this. Just think about it. What if? A hypothetical. Please, FBI, don't break in my window and steal me in the middle of the night. Please don't do that. Thank you. Anyway, hope you all have been informed, enlightened. Maybe not, well, not enlightened, but perhaps you're just thinking about it differently now. What if things had turned out differently? Anyway, hope you all enjoyed. I'll see you all next time. If you did enjoy, please leave a like rating down below. If not, please leave a dislike rating, nasty comments. Tell me what you think. If you're not in the U.S., what is your country like? Are you also paying exorbitant taxes that you'll never receive any benefit from? Let me know. Yeah. I thank you all for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.